In recent days, the rock world has fallen into an unprecedented silence, a heavy, echoing stillness after Ace Frehley, the man who once made the heavens tremble with his guitar, passed away. He didn't die on stage, not amid pyrotechnics and roaring crowds, but in a small studio in New Jersey, doing the only thing he ever truly knew how to do, playing music. He left quietly, surrounded by the lingering hum of the silver guitar that had been his companion for half a century. At 74, the Spaceman, the man who once turned arenas into galaxies, brought his journey to a close, leaving behind not just blazing riffs, but an emptiness that words can hardly describe. His family confirmed the news only hours after fans noticed his social media had gone eerily silent, a silence that sent shockwaves through the rock community. And now, as his loved ones prepare a private farewell in New York, no makeup, no fireworks, only candles and music. The world watches in quiet mourning. From Los Angeles to Tokyo, from smoky bars to the grand stages once lit by KISS, millions of fans light candles and replay the nights when Frehley made them believe music could touch the stars. Among countless tributes, one voice silenced the entire rock world. Gene Simmons, the man who stood beside Ace Frehley on stage for thousands of nights, his friend, his brother, and the one who helped build and lose the dream called KISS. They first met in 1972 at an audition in New York. Ace Frehley walked in wearing mismatched shoes, a silver jacket, and an old Les Paul. When he played his first note, the room fell completely silent. Gene Simmons later recalled in his memoir, Kiss and Makeup, "He hit one note, and the room lit up. That was Ace. You just knew." From that moment, they became opposites who completed each other. Gene was reason. Ace was soul. On stage, Gene breathed fire and spat blood, while Ace turned into a streak of silver light shooting across the galaxy. In a 2017 interview, Gene said, "Ace was the real deal. He had the magic touch, messy, loud, human, but absolutely real. Yet even the brightest light eventually meets the dark." As KISS grew into an empire, Gene became its businessman, and Ace grew tired of being caged. In his memoir, No Regrets, Ace Frehley admitted, "I loved Gene, but I hated being managed by him. He wanted control. I just wanted freedom." Gene, in an interview with Rolling Stone, summed it up. "Ace is a brother, but he's a brother who keeps breaking your heart." When Ace left the band in 1982, Gene said years later, "The day Ace left, a part of KISS went with him." They stayed apart for over a decade until the 1996 reunion. Backstage on the Alive Worldwide tour, Gene placed his hand on Ace's shoulder. No words, just a smile. Years later, Ace recalled, "We didn't need to say anything. We'd been through hell together." They learned forgiveness. And when they reunited again in 2018, Gene said, "I don't care what happened before. Ace will always be family." Ace replied, "We've had our fights, but Gene gave me my shot. Without him, there's no Spaceman." So when Ace Frehley passed away, Gene Simmons was the first to speak. At the memorial in New York, he stood in silence among the candles, his voice trembling. "Our hearts are broken. Ace is gone. No one can touch his legacy. He once told me that the fans were his family, and now they're the ones bringing him home." That moment, between tears and silence, became the final harmony of a legend. The moment rock and roll bowed its head to bid farewell to its own heart. But to understand why Ace Frehley's death shook the world so deeply, we must go back to the Bronx, where a boy once believed that noise could save a soul, and that sometimes silence is only the beginning of a legend. Paul Daniel Frehley was born on April 27, 1951, the youngest of 5 siblings in a working-class family of German-Dutch descent. His father was a semi-professional musician who played guitar in small bars. His mother was a quiet woman who loved classical music and believed that each of her children needed to find something that made them feel free. In their small apartment at 2010 Valentine Avenue, music and arguments blended together. The Bronx of the 1950s was a place where children learned to survive before they learned to dream. Ace was the most rebellious child. At school, classmates called him Space because he was always staring out the window, imagining himself drifting among planets. That nickname would later become Destiny, the Spaceman. But back then, Space Frehley was just an awkward teenager with poor grades, constantly suspended for fighting. His family was so poor they couldn't afford new clothes. The guitar his father gave him for Christmas in 1964, bought secondhand from a shop on Fordham Road, would change his life forever. The 13-year-old boy held that guitar as if he had found the key to escape the Bronx. "When I played those first notes, I knew this was how I'd survive," Ace once said in an interview. While other kids dreamed of becoming cops or baseball players, Ace dreamed of bright lights and the electric sound vibrating in his chest. Music came to him not through lessons, but instinct. He listened to the Rolling Stones, Jimi Hendrix, Jeff Beck, and learned by ear, playing until his fingertips bled. Whenever his parents fought, he would turn the amp up full volume, letting the guitar drown out every other noise. In the Bronx, where violence and poverty crept into every alley, that guitar became his only shield against the world. Yet it was within that chaos that Ace's artistic instincts were sharpened. At 17, he dropped out of high school, a decision the entire neighborhood thought was insane. But Ace didn't care. He delivered pizzas, carried heavy loads, painted houses, just to afford new strings and an amp. "I knew I wasn't born to live a normal life," he once said. "I was born to make noise." That noise, only a few years later, would make the whole world go silent. But before he became a legend, Ace Frehley was just a Bronx kid with a cheap guitar, eyes fixed on the sky, and a naive belief that one day, music would save his soul. Bronx, late 1960s. While America was still intoxicated by Woodstock, peace, and rebellion, Ace Frehley was wandering through small clubs with an old Les Paul slung over his shoulder. Each night he played for just a few dozen people, yet within the howl of an overheated amp, there was something different, a raw, imperfect, but utterly real energy that couldn't be ignored. Ace didn't just play music, he fought with sound, as if every riff was a way to resist reality itself. On rainy nights in Manhattan, he'd carry his guitar, step on stage without dinner, and leave only when the sun came up, drunk on whiskey, sweat, and the feeling that he was meant for something bigger. In 1972, a handwritten flyer pinned to the Village Voice Club board changed everything. The note read shakily, "Looking for an energetic original guitarist ready to give it all. New band forming." Ace showed up to the audition wearing mismatched clothes, one white shoe and one red, and holding a silver guitar that caught the neon light. When he finished playing, the room went silent. Paul Stanley recalled, "He hit one note, and the whole room lit up. Gene Simmons said just one line, 'That's our guy.' And just like that, KISS was born. 4 misfits, 4 completely different personalities, coming together to create a storm unlike anything rock had ever seen. For Ace, music alone wasn't enough. He wanted a universe of his own, where each member wasn't just a musician, but a myth. Thus, the Spaceman was born. With the silver suit, platform boots and metallic makeup, like a warrior from another planet. Ace designed every detail himself, from the glowing lights on his shoulders to the eyeliner strokes, as if sketching his childhood dream from the Bronx to fly off the earth. When KISS released their debut album in 1974, the world wasn't ready. Critics called them gaudy, meaningless, just showmen. But then KISS Alive, 1975, exploded like a rocket launch. Amid smoke, fire, and fake blood, Ace Frehley turned the guitar into a weapon of light, setting the stage ablaze. Literally. In packed arenas of over 20,000 fans chanting "Spaceman, Spaceman," every solo felt like he was truly vanishing into space. The world called it shock rock. But to Ace, it was a survival ritual. "When I put on the makeup, I wasn't Ace Frehley from the Bronx anymore," he said later. "I became what I always dreamed of. Free." That freedom, of course, came at a cost. Behind the silver armor and fireworks were sleepless nights, endless flights, and the loneliness of standing in front of thousands, yet feeling completely alone. But during those years, from 1973 to 1978, Ace Frehley did what no one else in KISS could. He turned the guitar into the band's soul. And when the world looked up at the stage, they didn't just see a man playing music. They saw a symbol burning bright. By the late 1970s, KISS was no longer just a band. They were a religion for youth. A generation of American teenagers found in them the explosion of emotion that society couldn't put into words. Smoke, pyrotechnics, fake blood, 4 white painted faces. These weren't just stage symbols, they were rituals of freedom. And at the center of that madness, Ace Frehley stood in his silver suit, his guitar flashing like a falling star across the night. When KISS Alive came out in 1975, everything changed. The band had been on the brink of collapse, drowning in debt and public indifference. But those raw, live recordings, driven by Ace's scorching guitar tone, reignited everything. In Cold Gin, Shock Me, and Parasite, people didn't just hear music. They heard the soul of the Bronx, gritty, hungry, and fearless. Ace never played like anyone else. He followed no rules. Each solo was its own story, sometimes off-beat, sometimes out of tune, but always terrifyingly real. Sound engineers used to say, if you mute Ace's guitar track, you lose the entire heartbeat of the song. When KISS Alive sold over 4 million copies, the band became a global phenomenon. They earned hundreds of thousands of dollars per show, appeared on every magazine cover, and sold mountains of posters, dolls, lighters, even KISS-branded coffins. Yet Ace, the most beloved Spaceman, remained the quietest of them all. While Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley negotiated deals and expanded the brand, Ace wanted only one thing: to play music his own way. In 1978, KISS made a bold decision. Each member would release a solo album on the same day. Everyone assumed Gene or Paul would come out on top. But then Ace Frehley, with the hit single New York Groove, became the surprise phenomenon. The chorus echoed across America. "I'm back, back in the New York Groove." It was a song about the very city that had once swallowed his youth, now turned into his triumphant anthem. The album exceeded all expectations, and Billboard wrote, "Ace Frehley just proved that sometimes the man in the shadows is the true soul of the spotlight." Amid the global frenzy, Ace became an unlikely star. He graced the cover of Guitar Player and was hailed by critics as the man who brought theatrical power to guitar art. But to Ace, fame wasn't the goal. It was a light too bright to let him sleep. During relentless tours, from the Tokyo Dome to Madison Square Garden, he began to burn out. When the lights went off, Ace would return to his hotel room and drink alone. While Gene and Paul drew up marketing plans, Ace craved silence. "I felt like I was flying high," he said in a rare 1980 interview, "but I didn't know who was piloting the ship." That line wasn't just about losing control. It was a warning of the darkness to come. Fame had carried him far from the Bronx, but it had also pushed him into an emptiness where no one truly understood him. The crowds screamed, yet all he could hear was the ringing in his ears after each show. The flashes popped, but the lights were blinding. He could no longer see his way home. From the Spaceman, Ace Frehley began to drift between two worlds, one of blazing stages and one of solitude, where his guitar slowly turned into a cry for help. Fame has its own way of warping a soul. For Ace Frehley, it didn't come from greed, but from emptiness. When the roar of the crowd filled the arena, he often felt as if he were standing in a void, looking down at himself, a stranger playing the role of the spaceman. At the height of 1979, KISS had become a massive commercial machine. Toys, comic books, movies, mountains of contracts. To Gene Simmons, it was strategy. To Ace, it was betrayal, a distortion of the rock spirit he once believed in. "I didn't want to be a product," he once said. "I wanted to be an artist." But in a world where everything was measured in profits, no one was listening anymore. After the shows, Ace turned to alcohol and cocaine as a form of escape. From a single glass of whiskey before a performance, it became a whole bottle afterward. He said the alcohol made him feel more real, as if only in drunkenness could he truly be himself. A friend once recalled, when he was sober, Ace would just sit alone staring at his hands. He trembled like someone who had just landed from a long flight but had nowhere to land. It was the image of a soul adrift. In 1980, KISS released Unmasked, an album critics tore apart. The band had turned toward pop, while Ace wanted to keep rock's raw spirit alive. The growing tension between him, Gene, and Paul became impossible to mend. They stopped talking. They stopped trusting. During a meeting in 1982, as Gene outlined plans for another tour, Ace silently stood up, removed his silver mask, placed it on the table, and walked out. No goodbye, no glance back. Leaving KISS, Ace Frehley found himself face to face with reality. For the first time, no one was controlling him, but no one was holding him up either. Then came the crash. Driving recklessly on an icy road in Westchester, his car spun out and nearly killed him. The headlines read, "The night the spaceman fell to Earth." But for Ace, it was simply the moment he hit bottom, forced to confront himself. In the months that followed, he drifted through life, studio, liquor, darkness. In 1983, he formed his own band, Frehley's Comet, and once again tried to reignite the old flame. The music still burned, but the fire was dimmer. He played better than ever, but the crowds were smaller. The world saw him only as the former member of KISS, a title that was both crown and chain. In a 1985 interview, when asked if he regretted leaving KISS, Ace just smiled. "If I'd stayed, I'd be dead by now, but after leaving, I don't even know what I'm living for." It wasn't just an answer. It was a confession. In the years that followed, he spiraled into addiction and depression. He was arrested for drunk driving, narrowly escaping death multiple times. Those who played with him would say, when Ace was sober, he was a genius. When he was drunk, he disappeared. Those were the years when the silver paint on the spaceman's face began to crack. The fractures weren't just on his skin. They ran deep into his soul, his faith, his dreams, and the freedom he once chased. He once said, "People think alcohol ruined me, but loneliness killed me first." A simple sentence, but one that stripped fame down to its rawest truth. Not everyone is strong enough to survive being loved too much. The man who once made the world look up to the stars no longer knew where he stood. But just when it seemed everything, career, fame, health, was gone, Ace heard an old sound again. The guitar his father once taught him to play. A simple, humble sound, but enough to pull him back. And from the deepest pit of his darkest years, the spaceman would pick up his guitar again, not to soar into the sky, but to find his way back home. When darkness had swallowed almost all the light in Ace Frehley's life, many believed he would never return. But sometimes, music has a way of resurrecting souls that drugs, alcohol, and fame cannot save. In the early 1990s, Ace re-emerged with Frehley's Comet in a different form. Older, quieter, but the silver glow of his Les Paul still shone bright under the stage lights. He no longer screamed like in his KISS days. Instead, he played slower, deeper, as if every note were an apology to himself. His 1989 album, Trouble Walkin', marked the beginning of that redemption. No more commercial explosions, just a lonely man pulling himself out of the ashes. Then fate, with cruel irony, pulled him back into the past. In 1996, when KISS announced their reunion tour with all 4 original members, Ace agreed to return. On opening night in Detroit, tens of thousands roared as he stepped out in his familiar silver suit. The first guitar note struck like thunder. Gene looked over and smiled, and in that moment, every grudge seemed to dissolve. But happiness didn't last. Though the tour sold out worldwide, old cracks reappeared. Grueling schedules, internal tension, and that same loneliness Ace had never escaped. "I came back to find my brothers," he once said, but it turned out we'd all changed too much. After the tour, Ace withdrew once again. He chose a quieter life, away from the media, focusing on sobriety and healing. He began taking photos, collecting guitars, and sometimes just sitting in the studio, playing old riffs as if talking to an old friend. That was when he realized music was no longer a career. It was survival. "I've tried to walk away from the guitar," he said in an interview, "but every time I stay silent too long, I hear it in my head. I guess that's the universe telling me I'm not done yet." In 2009, after 2 decades of stops and starts, he released Anomaly, a fitting title for someone like Ace. The album reached the Billboard Top 30 and earned praise from critics. Rolling Stone wrote, "Ace Frehley is no longer KISS's alien. He's a human being telling his survival story." And indeed, every song on Anomaly felt like a memoir of an addict who recovered, of a man who lost everything but still believed in the faintest flicker of light. Behind those rebirths lay a complicated personal life. Ace had married Jeanette Treratola and had a daughter, Monique, but the marriage collapsed during his darkest years. He later admitted, "I wasn't the perfect father, but I'm trying. Every day I'm learning how to say, 'I'm sorry.'" Years later, he shared a long-term relationship with Rachel Gordon, who stood by him through sobriety. She once said, "When Ace is sober, he's the sweetest kid in the world." It sounded simple, but it was perhaps the most accurate description of him. A child who never fully grew up, forever wrestling with his own shadows. In his 60s, Ace returned to the stage with the strength of a survivor. He still toured, still laughed, still played the guitar with that same spark in his eyes as in the beginning. When asked why he didn't retire, he simply said, "Because I still hear music in my head." It sounded lighthearted, but it carried his entire philosophy. For Ace Frehley, music wasn't a job. It was proof he still existed, even after time had taken everything else. At 70, he released Spaceman 2018, A gentle farewell to those who once believed in him, and perhaps to himself, the man who once flew too far and fell back to earth. He no longer chased perfection. He only sought truth. "I used to think fans wanted me to be perfect," he said. "Now I know they just want me to be real." And so, even as the stage lights dimmed, Ace Frehley remained standing. The man who once turned the guitar into flight, now simply gazing at the sky in peace. Yet with every strike of a string, he still flies, if only in his mind. The day news of Ace Frehley's death spread across the world. Millions of rock fans felt as though a piece of their youth had been taken away. It wasn't just because he was KISS's original guitarist. It was because he was the last symbol of a purer kind of rock. The kind born from pain, insecurity, and the belief that music could save the human soul. Major newspapers reported the story. Those who once shared the stage with him, Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley, Peter Criss, all spoke out. Gene wrote, "Our hearts are broken. Ace is gone. No one can ever touch his legacy. I know he loved the fans. He told me that many times." Paul's words were shorter but just as powerful. He was the soul of KISS. Ace's funeral was held privately in New York. No makeup, no fireworks, just candles and music. On a small stage beside his portrait stood his silver Les Paul, leaning against an amp, its strings still trembling slightly as if waiting for its owner to return. Outside, fans gathered with candles, playing New York Groove and singing the chorus that had echoed across the world for nearly half a century. "I'm back, back in the New York Groove." For the first time, the song wasn't a declaration of life. It was a farewell from a legend. Friends and fellow musicians remembered Ace as a complex man, funny, impulsive, but always genuine. Alice Cooper said, "Ace could make you laugh until you cried, then 5 minutes later sit in silence like he was talking to God." Fans called him the Spaceman, but what they truly loved was how human he was. The missed notes, the clumsy riffs, the times he fell and somehow stood up again. In a world where everything in music is polished and perfected, Ace Frehley proved that truth, messy and raw, is still the most beautiful thing. His legacy wasn't just in albums or tours. It lived in the influence he left on thousands of young guitarists. Slash once said that after hearing "Shock Me" for the first time, he knew he had to pick up a guitar. Dimebag Darrell, James Hetfield, Tom Morello, all named Ace as one of the first to make them believe a guitar could speak. And maybe that's how Ace Frehley lives on, through the hands of young players still chasing the dream he began in the Bronx half a century ago. After the funeral, tribute concerts were held around the world, in Los Angeles, Tokyo, London, Berlin. Everywhere the same song played, beneath the same banner. Some stars fade. His learned to shine forever. People understood that for Ace, death wasn't an ending. It was a rest note in a song that never truly stopped. And if there's one thing to remember about Ace Frehley, it's his beautiful defiance. Always choosing his own road no matter how rough, always daring to fail, but never to fake. He lived the way he played. Imperfect, but utterly real. When once asked if he could live his life again, what he would change, Ace answered, "Maybe I'd drink a little less, but I'd still fly, because I was born to fly." Now, looking back, the world understands. Ace Frehley wasn't just the guitarist of KISS. He was the soul of an era. A time when rock was still the honest scream of those unafraid to be alone. And somewhere out there, in the silence between two notes, you can still hear that silver guitar, rising, shimmering, and never fading away. In his final months, Ace Frehley lived quietly in a small house in New Jersey. where he had turned the basement into a private studio he jokingly called My Little Spaceship. Every morning he brewed a cup of black coffee, placed his silver Les Paul on his lap, and played until the first light of day filled the room. A neighbor recalled still hearing that sound, slower than before, but never gone. Before his passing, Ace had been working on several tracks for a new solo project, tentatively titled Silver Shadow. His longtime engineer, Tom Higgins, said, he still wanted it to sound like 1975, raw, loud, alive. He seemed to know his time was running out, yet he wanted to leave this world the same way he had lived, surrounded by the sound that defined him. When news of his death was confirmed, stages once ruled by KISS went dark. In New York, hundreds of fans gathered before the graffiti wall that once read, "Rock and Roll Over," lighting candles and laying down silver masks. In Los Angeles, classic rock stations played Shock Me and New York Groove all night. Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley, Peter Criss, and countless musicians, from Slash and Joe Perry to Dave Grohl, posted tributes. Thousands of fans around the world shared photos of Ace with the same caption: "The spaceman has gone home." At the private memorial in New York, there were no fireworks, no makeup, only candles and the sound of guitar strings humming softly. Gene Simmons placed a silver pick on his old friend's coffin and said, "Our hearts are broken. Ace is gone. No one can touch his legacy. He once told me the fans were his family, and now they're the ones bringing him home." After the funeral, his little studio in New Jersey became a pilgrimage site for fans. They called it the Chapel of Sound, where the walls still seemed to vibrate with the echo of strings. On the desk, the old microphone and an unfinished lyric sheet remained, with one scribbled line in his handwriting: "Still flying." Perhaps that was his final goodbye. Though his body rests, Ace Frehley still lives on in every riff, in every album of those he inspired. At every KISS concert, when silver lights sweep across the stage, you can almost feel him there, silent, smiling, still flying across the sky of rock and roll. Yet few knew that just 7 months earlier, Ace had joked in an interview that a psychic once told him he would live to be 100. He laughed, his voice raspy. "I've still got plenty of riffs left to play." No one realized it would be one of his last lines. His death, in that sense, felt like fate's cruel irony, for a man who truly believed he had years left to fly. But Ace Frehley was never one to obey fate. As a poor kid from the Bronx, he learned to defy destiny with 2 weapons: music and survival. Few people knew that as a teenager he joined a small street gang called the Ducky Boys, where violence and shouting were the only languages spoken. He once said, "Music saved me from prison. Without the guitar, I wouldn't have made it past 20. From then on, every note he played carried the breath of someone who had stood on the edge. The story behind Shock Me remains the most striking proof of that. During a 1976 concert in Florida, Ace was nearly killed by a massive electric shock after touching an ungrounded handrail. The 220-volt current paralyzed him for several seconds, but minutes later he returned to the stage to finish the show. The incident became legend, inspiring him to write Shock Me, what the world would later call a challenge to fate. After that night, KISS overhauled its entire stage system to protect performers, a small detail that said it all. Even danger couldn't stop Ace from playing. Yet behind the fiery guitar, there were always cracks that only Ace could feel. Though New York Groove became his biggest hit, reaching the Billboard Top 20, Ace admitted he felt empty because it wasn't his own composition. "I love it, but it's not my child," he once said. Perhaps that was his quiet heartbreak, that his brightest moment didn't fully belong to him. Beauty, he knew, always came with pain. Off stage, his life was a constant tug-of-war between light and shadow. His marriage to Jeanette Treratola ended when alcohol consumed him, but his daughter Monique became his reason to survive. When Ace began his sobriety journey, Monique was in her early 20s. She came to see him, looked straight into his eyes, and said, "I don't need a legend. I just need my dad." Friends said Ace broke down crying and quit drinking the very next day. He would later call that moment the most beautiful chorus of my life. Beyond music, Ace also had an artist's eye and designer's mind, something few fans knew. He drew logos, created the lightning bolt guitar strap for KISS, and designed much of his own stage outfits. His IQ was said to be 164, an astonishing number for someone often labeled a wild rocker. Yet perhaps that same intelligence made him think too deeply, stay lonely too long, and feel pain too intensely. "Only when I'm on stage," he once said, "does my mind finally go quiet." In his later years, Ace stopped chasing perfection. He wrote, recorded, and played simply to keep his heart beating. Anomaly, 2009, and Spaceman, 2018, weren't albums of a man seeking a comeback. They were the words of someone seeking truth. Each song felt like a fragment of life, imperfect, raw, but alive. Backstage, when asked why he still performed at 70, Ace only smiled and said, "Because I still hear music in my head." And now, as that music has finally fallen silent, the world understands that Ace Frehley was never just the guitarist of KISS. He was a symbol of honesty in a world full of illusion. He turned every mistake into melody, every fall into rhythm, and every loneliness into art. Gene Simmons once said, "No one can touch his legacy." Perhaps because that legacy isn't measured in skill, fame, or money, but in the raw emotion he left behind for an entire generation. From the Bronx to the biggest stages on Earth, from street gangs to rock legend, from near-death shocks to post-sobriety smiles, Ace Frehley's journey proves the one thing he always believed. As long as there is music, people can be reborn. And somewhere out there, across the galaxy he once painted in sound, the Spaceman is still playing another solo, softer, brighter, and freer than ever. Ace Frehley didn't just leave behind riffs that still echo through rock history. He left behind a rare lesson for this noisy world. That honesty, no matter how awkward or imperfect, can outlive death itself. He was never a flawless star. He was a real soul, full of missed beats, cracks, and fragile moments. Yet from those very flaws, he created music that made the world stop and listen. For over half a century, Ace turned the chaos of his life into melody. He was electrocuted on stage, haunted by alcohol, lost in fame. Yet he always came back, every time, through that same raw, honest, gravelly guitar tone. If Diane Keaton once turned silence into music, then Ace Frehley turned chaos into song. And maybe that's why people will always remember him, not as a distant legend, but as a man who dared to fall, dared to rise again, and dared to be real. Today, when we listen to New York Groove or Shock Me, it's more than nostalgia. It's Ace still speaking to us. I'm still flying. Because even though his body rests, his sound has never gone silent. It lingers in the air, woven into the guitar strings of the next generation, reminding us that rock and roll, like the human soul, only dies when we stop believing in it. What do you think about Ace Frehley's journey? The man who once got lost in the sky but found his way home through his music? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe to join us as we continue telling the stories of legends who never fade.